Hello, this is Ken Urban, doing another CSC 125 video on inheritance this time, and that's the is a relationship where one thing is built on top of another thing or sort of added on as additional. The example I'm going to talk about in here is just a big piece of code about this inheritance, which has a whole number of objects. So sort of the base class that I have is an employee class, and then from it I derive two different types of employee, a full-time employee and a part-time employee. And then from the full-time employee I'm going to derive a salaried employee and an hourly employee, and then from the part-time employee I'm going to derive a consultant and an intern, and then we'll add a new type later on as thing goes on. So let me just kind of take you through the code. There's a link to the code below here. Basically, we have header files for each of the different ones. I've separated them out into separate files. So we have the employee header file. I don't have a lot in here to avoid clutter, but I just basically have a first name and a last name here in the employee class. There's really no code to speak of in here yet. We'll add as time goes on. And then for the employee class out here in main, basically I create an employee called the MP1. I set the first name, I set the last name, and then I just print it out. And then I have this little spacer function just so that everything doesn't blur into each other when we kind of check the output. Now underneath, right, the employee class, I have a derived class called full-time employee. So that looks a little different. When we look at the full-time employee header file, let me get a little more room here. Notice that it's public inheritance, which takes I guess the way to view it is take everything from employee and, if you can, make it public in the full-time employee class. So so basically, full-time employee is additions to what's in employee. So in the full-time employee class, I just have a string which is called the office, and then I have a setter and a getter. A setter and a getter for that particular object. And again, I don't believe I have any code in the CPP file. Again, we'll add that as this example goes on. While we're here, also have an hourly employee. Right, an hourly employee has an hourly rate with getters and setters for that hourly rate. And again, no code in the main. You can see that I have for the employee, right, we just have setting the first name, the last name. For the full-time employee, which has an office, right, I have set first name, set last name, right, but that's the same as in the employee class. So a full-time employee, since it's an employee or derived from the employee class, is the right way to say it, it also pulls all those functions, right, set first name and set last name, right, into itself. So it sort of takes all of that, copies it in as a piece, and then in addition now it has the set office. The other one we looked at was the hourly employee, right, which had, right, the set office from being a full-time employee, right, because the hourly employee, back to the header file real quick, right, the hourly employee copies everything from full-time employee. So that means it copies it from full-time employee, which also copies it from employee, right? Kind of the idea that I have in my head is that, right, here's my employee class, right, and then the full-time employee takes everything from the employee class and brings it in there, and then this hourly employee takes everything from that class and that class. So it makes one big object, which is consisting of pieces of those other two objects, right? So a salaried employee is a full-time employee, which is a regular employee. So my example here, back out in main, I basically test all of these classes. Part-time employee doesn't have anything added on. We'll do that later. Nor does consultants. Intern has a supervisor. So it has the set and first name, set first and last name from the base class, which is employee, but it has nothing in part-time employee, but it has something in the class itself. So the idea is that you don't necessarily need to add anything in here. You can just add it here. These can kind of be placeholders. That's sort of the idea that goes with this. So I create 7 different employees, 1 for each class, testing all the methods that I put in here, and so that when I run this, right, I get everything has, right, an employee methods, which just prints the name, right, and then some of them have otherly, like for instance, full-time employee has an office, salaried employee has a salary in an office, salary from the salaried employee, office from the full-time employee, name from the employee class, right, and then the hourly employee has an hourly rate from the hourly employee class, office has from the full-time employee class, and name has from the employee class. So this is the code that we're going to start working with for the next couple of projects.